Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Christina Alcalde. I'm Vice President for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion at Miami University, and we're so excited to be here with you to formally recognize and celebrate the Freedom Center for its truly amazing accomplishments and ongoing efforts to raise awareness and educate about inclusive freedom, and for serving as an impactful and critical resource for so many students, and we'll hear from two of those students shortly, and teachers, and really all of us in the community, in the nation, and beyond. As two institutions with core values around social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and focusing on education and on engagement, the Freedom Center and Miami University share really important commitments and goals. Educating about inclusive freedom requires not only the important work of confronting the past, and by doing that, avoiding repeating patterns of injustice and oppression, but also the work of confronting ongoing injustices in the present, including racial disparities and including widespread racism, to intentionally bring about change and to create a more inclusive society for all of us. We respect and applaud the work of the Freedom Center in carrying out this important, meaningful, and definitely oftentimes difficult work, which has such a positive impact on all of us. Making this evening possible has been a true partnership, and we are thrilled to both celebrate the Freedom Center and to join forces to further engage all of us in a dialogue on how the realities of race continue to shape our society today. And we'll do this through a panel discussion immediately following the award ceremony as part of the event tonight. Thank you all again for being here, and a special thank you to the Freedom Center personnel and ambassadors, the Cincinnati Mayor's Office, Miami's Board of Trustees, the President's Office, Alumni Relations, especially Kim Tavares, amazing, University Marketing and Communications, all the student volunteers, the Glee Club again, Wil Haygood for being here, for writing that book, and for signing that wonderful book, and really to all of you for making this possible. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Chris Miller, Senior Director of Community Engagement and Education at the Freedom Center.
Welcome and good evening. We convene this evening on the convergence of two significant recognitions: International Underground Railroad Month and Ohio's Emancipation Day. On June 14, 2022, this year, House Bill 340 was signed, designating September as International Underground Railroad Month. Ohio became the 12th state in the nation with this proclamation. September was chosen to represent International Underground Railroad Month because it was the month that two of the most well-known freedom seekers and Underground Railroad operatives, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, escaped bondage. This historic proclamation recognizes the ongoing legacy of the Underground Railroad and Ohio's prominent role in the narrative of freedom. On September 22nd, of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued a preliminary version of the Emancipation Proclamation. People gathered in public places to hear it read out loud, including at the Ohio State House. This led to an annual celebration of emancipation by Ohioans. The day became official in 2006 when the Ohio legislature passed Bill 393, designating September 22nd, today, as Emancipation Day. From the early years of the Freedom Center, a meaningful relationship was forged with Miami University, initially through our youth docent program, then to other public programs such as the Freedom 55 mini conference that we held just a few years ago. Respectively and collectively, we've carried the legacy of our freedom forebears as we continue the work of courage, cooperation, and perseverance to inform, empower, and uplift. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the Freedom Summer of 1964 Award Ceremony. My name is Grace Kelly, and I am Miami University's Andrew Goodman Vote Everywhere Ambassador. Andrew Goodman was one of 800 college students who came to the Western College for Women in 1964 to participate in the Freedom Summer Project. This ambitious undertaking involved training college students from across the country to register African American voters in Mississippi and assist with grassroots community organizing efforts led by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Soon after arriving in Mississippi, Goodman, along with fellow civil rights workers James Chaney and Michael Schwerner, were murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan. Their deaths rocked the nation and contributed to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Goodman's parents created the Andrew Goodman Foundation in 1966 to carry on his legacy, encouraging civic engagement and voter education on college campuses. Miami University honors the legacy of Freedom Summer by creating a culture that empowers students to become civically engaged. In the 2020 election, the voter turnout rate among students registered to vote was 82%, over 10 percentage points above the national average. Miami University has received national recognition for their commitment to civic engagement by the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge, which certified Miami University as a gold campus for excellence in voter engagement. As the Andrew Goodman Ambassador, I have led efforts to increase voter registration in underrepresented student populations and advocated for wider Freedom Summer remembrance within the student body. This summer, I had the opportunity to participate in an intergenerational panel at the Andrew Goodman Foundation's National Civic Leadership Training Summit with other student leaders from across the country, as well as Freedom Summer, as Freedom Summer 1964 alum David J. Dennis, to both reflect on the movement and discuss where we still have to go. The Freedom Summer of 1964 Award is an opportunity for the Miami community to reflect on our deep connection to this history and challenge ourselves to continue fighting the racial injustice that persists in today's society. This award is given to those who, like Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman, have devoted themselves to civil rights and social justice. The National Underground Railroad Freedom Center embodies the legacy of Freedom Summer through their mission of pursuing inclusive freedom by promoting social justice for all.
Thank you for coming to the Freedom Summer of 1964 Award Ceremony. My name is Evan Gates. I'm a third-year Miami student studying economics and poverty studies. The award being presented tonight is named after a 1964 voter registration drive pushed out by organizations such as the Congress on Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. 800 workers trained across 2 orientation sessions on the campus of the Western College for Women, now Miami's Western Campus, forever tying the history of Little Oxford, Ohio to the fight for racial justice in Mississippi and across the United States. The events following Freedom Summer shaped an era of civil rights activism. The years after the summer of 1964 saw the creation of freedom schools across the South, the formation of a political party, and federal protections against racial discrimination through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The political and social landscape of this country began to change, making more strides towards equality than there had been perhaps ever before. Freedom is a constant struggle. The work done to uplift racial equity and justice for all today in the 60s persists in the form of organized community members committed to enacting meaningful change. I find it daunting to reflect on how to continue the work that others have died for. Andrew Goodman was my age, 20, when he was murdered. But it is still our responsibility to continue their work and that legacy. Miami has afforded me opportunities I never thought that I would have. I serve as the president of the Diversity Affairs Council on campus, where I facilitate university-wide programming and advocacy centric on supporting marginalized identities. I previously represented the Andrew Goodman Foundation on campus to further civic engagement and Freedom Summer awareness. This past summer, I organized and co-led a contingent of Miami students to the National Civil Rights Conference in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we had the rare opportunity to interact with civil rights leaders like David J. Dennis Sr. and engage with work that's being done across the nation. Every opportunity is a privilege that was unimaginable to me a few years ago, but Miami and its commitment to continuing the Freedom Summer legacy have made it possible. With that, I am grateful to introduce someone affecting that change today. He has continued to push the bounds of what is possible for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Miami through initiatives like Boldly Creative and the Moonshot for Equity. My attendance in Miami is only possible through a scholarship called the Presidential Fellows Award, which is a full-ride merit scholarship coordinated by President Gregory Crawford and University Ambassador Dr. Renata Crawford. Words cannot express how this scholarship changed my life. I didn't know I was going to go to college, and this set me on a different trajectory. All the work I do now is only possible because someone entrusted with me some faith to make change. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce Miami University President Greg Crawford.
Well, thank you, Evan, and let's please give another round of applause for both Grace and Evan. You are an inspiration to us all. So hello and welcome. It is so great to be here with you on this special occasion tonight. Miami's Freedom Summer of '64 Award recognizes the dedication and contributions of individuals and organizations who champion civil rights and justice. It is given in remembrance and recognition of the Western College for Women site, where 800 young Americans trained to register Black voters in the South in 1964. This is the 7th time that Miami has had the honor of presenting this award. The first inaugural award has been given to Honorable Congressman John Lewis. And each time we give this award, I have been humbled by just the courage of the recipient who actually won this award. This year's recipient, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, embodies the spirit, the mission, the tenacity, and sustained the bravery of Freedom Summer activists. The center is a national icon that enriches our country and community by educating and creating more advocates for equality. Now, I'd like to invite Woodrow Keon, President and Chief Operating Officer for Freedom Center, to join me at the podium. We're going to stand right here. We're going to undo it. Okay. For nearly 20 years, the Freedom Center has awakened global consciousness about the true meaning of freedom. Thank you to the picking up the mantle and carrying on Freedom Center's mission to enlighten, support, and elevate champions for change. Woodrow, it is my genuine honor as president of Miami University to present the National Underground Freedom Center with the Freedom Summer of '64 Award. Miami University will continue to support your efforts to modernize and the advancement of equity and inclusive freedom. Congratulations. Thank you.
Well, thank you, President Crawford, for this incredible honor. Before I go any further, I would like to have all of my colleagues at the Freedom Center, our board of directors, if you're board of directors, staff members, volunteers, all of you stand here to represent. So would you please stand to be recognized for the work that you've done to get us to this point? Thank you. Please stand and be recognized. Thank you so much. These are the people that make it happen. On behalf of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, its board, staff, and volunteers, I'm grateful to accept this recognition and humbled to be among the visionaries and giants who have shared this award. This award is recognition of a nearly 30-year quest by the Freedom Center to ensure social justice and racial equity for all. We hope to honor the spirit of this award in two ways. One, by educating, energizing, and mobilizing the next generation of modern abolitionists. And two, by relentlessly defending and advocating for the right of every citizen to vote. And just like the individuals who gathered for change in 1964, today's modern abolitionists are the young, diverse generation who courageously advocate for change across the globe. The Freedom Summer of 1964 was a moment in which ordinary individuals took on extraordinary risk in pursuit of equity. It is a remarkable testament to the importance of voting rights. Hundreds of young volunteers from across the country, black and white, Jew and Gentile, prepared at Miami University to face the brazen violence of this mission. These students walked into the fiery pit of racial hatred epitomized by 1960s Mississippi, knowing the threats and abuse they would face. 3 of them gave their lives in the pursuit of equity: James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Andrew wasn't even of legal age to vote, but gave his life to protect that sacred right for others. We must remember the sacrifices made in the name of voting rights so that we never forget the power of its worth. During that pivotal summer, over 50 years ago, more than 800 young people from across the country gathered in Oxford, Ohio, with the common goal of securing voting rights of black Mississippians they didn't even know. In 1957, Dr. King said, and I quote, "Give us the ballot and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot and we will fill our legislative halls with men," and today he would say, "and women of goodwill." It would take another 8 years of bloodshed before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 legally prohibited the discriminatory acts that kept black voters away from the ballot box. It is considered the most comprehensive piece of civil rights legislation in U.S. history. But regrettably, the U.S. Supreme Court greatly weakened it by issuing 2 decisions in 2013 and 2021. The John Lewis Voting Rights Amendment Act and the Freedom to Vote Act seek to restore and enhance equitable voting rights for all citizens. In 2019, Congressman John Lewis said, and I quote, "The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in democracy." We all know what happened just a year later in our nation's presidential election. The right to vote is not guaranteed in this nation, as already been said. It must be continually defended and expanded to ensure every citizen has a voice in our country, and to ensure every nation were born through the blood, and to ensure the equity and justice in this nation were born through the blood and fortitude of the righteous and secured at the ballot box. And we must defend them at the ballot box. As we accept this award, we do so as a promise to honor its spirit and equity. Tonight we celebrate, but tomorrow we continue the work propelled to the national spotlight by the tragic deaths of James, Andrew, and Michael, and many others whose stories were not nationally known. We will continue our quest to ensure every voice is heard and that our nation is reflective of and dedicated to the full representation of all its people. In doing so, we will achieve the vision of equity those young men and the other Freedom Summer volunteers believed our country should be. In closing, I want to say thank you to the leadership, trustees, and alumni of Miami University, and to advocates of equity and social justice here tonight and across our country. I thank you for your courage, your cooperation, and your perseverance. Each of us is responsible for honoring the Freedom Summer 64 volunteers and countless others' legacy by confronting voter discrimination and intimidation in every precinct in America until our nation unequivocally fulfills the 15th Amendment's constitutional promise. And that constitutional promise reads like this: "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." Thank you so much for this wonderful honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keon, for those powerful words. Now I'd like to invite Miami University Ambassador, Dr. Renata Crawford, to the podium for closing remarks.
Thank you, Grace, and hello. Hasn't tonight been incredible? Just the students, everything has just been amazing, and we're not done yet. Congratulations again to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Summer for this very well-deserved recognition. Thank you for everything you do to continue to elevate and improve society. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It is not possible to be in favor of justice for some people and not in favor of justice for all people. Inclusive freedom is inevitable. It is a human right." Nearly 60 years after Freedom Summer of '64, the legacy of those young activists is still moving forward today. And with organizations like the Freedom Center at the helm, I am confident that we will achieve a more inclusive future for future generations. Please join us in the theater for the second part of this event, a panel discussion, Race and Necessary Dialogue in America. Thank you for being here.
Thank you again so much for joining us tonight. As we can see, the work of the Freedom Center continues to inspire us to engage in important conversations around justice, inclusive freedom, and ongoing inequities. So I want to welcome you to the second part of the event tonight, a panel discussion on race and necessary dialogue in America. In addition to an amazing panel of distinguished speakers, whom we'll soon hear about, we're fortunate to welcome a well-known and respected host and moderator with profound knowledge and expertise on justice and race relations. Jeff Pegues is CBS News Chief National Affairs and Justice Correspondent. He's a 3-time Emmy Award winner with more than 2 decades of reporting experience covering national and international stories. He has reported on presidential conventions and elections, Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Rita, terrorist attacks and active shooting incidents, and so much more also. He is recognized as one of the most informed voices on the tensions between the police and Black communities, a topic he wrote about in his 2017 book, Black and Blue, Inside the Divide Between Police and Black America. A year later, he published Compromat, How Russia Undermined American Democracy, about the Russian hacking of the 2016 election. Jeff Pegues is also a Miami alum, class of 1992, a national trustee for Miami University, and was Miami University's 2019 Spring Commencement Speaker. Thank you for being with us this evening, Jeff, and welcome.
Let me adjust the mic for the taller people in the crowd. It's good to be here, good to be back. Christina, thank you for the introduction and reading word for word what I told you to read. Really appreciate that. Maybe we'll shorten it next time. But it's good to be here, and Christina reminded me of the 2 books that I wrote, and it was funny because when I sat next to Wil Haygood over here, he's like, "So, hey, Jeff, have you signed on for your next book?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm not like you, you know? I haven't turned out 100 books, man. I can't do that. I had 2 in me, and that's it. That's it. But it's good to be back. And the operative word tonight is discussion. This is just going to be a discussion about race in Cincinnati, race in America, because unfortunately, even in this day and age, it's the kind of discussion that people still have, well, I guess they're uncomfortable sometimes talking about race, but that's what we're going to do. Let me introduce our guests. Mayor Aftab Pureval is the 70th mayor of Cincinnati. He was raised in Southwest Ohio, the son of first-generation Americans. He is making history as Cincinnati's first Asian American mayor. As mayor, he is working to grow Cincinnati equitably across all 52 neighborhoods. The mayor of Cincinnati. Dr. Joan Ferrante is a professor of sociology at Northern Kentucky University. She is an author, consultant filmmaker, and the founder director of the Mourning the Creation of Racial Categories project. MCRC is known for using dance, music, theater, poetry, and the visual arts to tell the stories of how people in the U.S. have been and still are divided from each other into unequally valued racial categories such as Asian, Black, and white. Dr. Joan Ferrante. Wil Haygood is Miami University's visiting Broadway scholar, a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. Haygood is the author of 9 books. All right, so I was a little off. I said 100. I mean, okay, 9 books. Among them, The Butler, one of my favorites, adapted into a prize-winning 2013 film that, of course, starred Oprah Winfrey and Forrest Whitaker. Was Gail on the set at all? No, okay. I thought my friend Gail was on it. Okay. Let's welcome Wil Haygood. Okay, the first question is for the mayor. You are a first in this city of Cincinnati?
Yes.
Yes. How much have you had to deal with issues of race? And how do you approach it without offending someone?
Well, first off, thank you so much for inviting me to this incredibly important forum and celebration. It's a genuine honor to be with so many Red Hawks. I'm wearing the pin, so honorary. It's a very big question, and there's a lot of different ways that I can answer that, but I'll answer it with a very, very personal lens, and that is a race is a part of my everyday life. There are probably a lot of firsts in this room. Maybe you were the first to go to college. Maybe you're the first to get a degree, get a job to support your family. So a lot of people know that being first is something to be proud of, but oftentimes when you're first, you're expected to be perfect, and you're expected to work harder than those that have, frankly, are from a family that's been there before. And that certainly was my experience. I had a whole other career as a litigator before I jumped into politics, but particularly in politics, specifically for Asian and Indian Americans, and particularly for folks who have ethnic last names or have an accent, the obstacles for entry into politics is profoundly challenging. Politics is all about manufacturing or creating empathy and connection, personal connection with complete strangers. And if you are visibly different than that person, or if your name is different or hard to pronounce, it can be very difficult to quickly and effectively create that connection. And so in 2016, when I would tell people that I wanted to run for the clerk of courts at the time, they would say, you've got to change your name to Adam or to Al. A brown dude cannot win in conservative Hamilton County. Can't do it. And so they weren't necessarily wrong, right? You hear that story and you think, oh, these people are terrible. But if you see AFTAB on a yard sign, it doesn't necessarily click that that's a human being, right? Maybe it's an insurance company. Maybe it's an acronym for something. But I didn't change my name. Instead of running away from a perceived weakness, I ran towards it. I hung a lantern on it. I raised enough money in that first race to get on TV, and in the TV commercial, every time I said my name, a big yellow duck puppet popped up next to me and repeated my name in the Aflac voice. Not dignified, but very memorable and very effective. I ultimately went on to win and became the first Democrat in 100 years to hold that position. The good news of the story, though, is that now that I'm mayor, those same people come to me and say, Mayor, I can't run and win in Hamilton County. My name is Joe Smith. How am I going to stick out from the crowd? And so, while it is more difficult, there is a tipping point by which at least I personally was able to take a perceived vulnerability and weakness and make it into a strength. But that required so much more creativity, so much more hard work. And when I look back on those Aflac commercials, of course I'm proud of them, but it is bittersweet because a part of me is embarrassed that I had to be self-deprecating, embarrassed that I had to make light of my ethnicity and my culture in order to be more accessible. And so hopefully there's a time when there's a critical mass enough of Asian Americans, particularly, and South Asians, particularly here in the city, where that won't be the exception, but rather the norm.
Mayor Pureval, how do you, when you look around the Freedom Center, what resonates with you?
Well, sitting in my seat as mayor, what resonates is the original sin of America that continues to echo and have real effects in 2022 in Cincinnati. Because like it or not, we are still a segregated city. We are still a city that has concentrations of poverty, primarily in our Black communities. There is no issue that comes across my desk that isn't steeped in challenges specifically for our Black community. We are the product of generational discrimination. And we see it every day in Cincinnati, where for Black communities and Black people, life expectancy is worse, economic opportunities are worse, education opportunities are worse. And so these issues were not created overnight. They're generations in the making, starting with slavery, the continued onslaught of the right to vote, insidious tactics like redlining, systemic injustices in our criminal justice system. We were designed this way over generations. And so what this place in particular reminds me of the awesome responsibility that I have, not to fix these generational problems, but to do my best to start resolving them and fixing them and moving us forward. Because if 40% of the city does not have the same opportunities and are in fact designed to be disadvantaged over the other 60%, then Cincinnati cannot be that global destination where young people, young diverse families want to come and stay and thrive. It is at the very heart of our mission statement as a city. If we want to grow, and we have to grow, cities our size are either growing or dying, then racial equity has to be a strategic priority, and it certainly is of mine and this council.
Wil Haygood, what do you see when you look out at the city of Cincinnati in Southwest Ohio?
First, I have been sometimes practicing in my kitchen, and when I'll hear CBS News comes on,
Okay.
and I'll say, Nora, Nora, we are out here at the Treasury Department, and Donald Trump has done something today that will shock the country again.
Oh, yes.
Then I run to
Don't
the
get me
TV.
started.
Thanks. So I say, hey, I got to go to the TV and get to Jeff. My man is on. But, Joan, Mayor, It's an honor to share the stage with you. Thank you very much, Jeff, and all of you for caring about this moment in history. Walking down there, and looking at those pictures, Sidney Poitier and Sammy Davis Jr., I've seen many pictures in here of people who I have traveled this world trying to unravel the mysteries of their lives. Adam Clayton Powell, Thurgood Marshall, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sammy Davis Jr. It's a part of the American story that has grabbed hold of me, and history is important. And it's just been announced last week that the AP has orchestrated the first Black history curriculum for high schools across this country. In 2022, I mean, I've been out there on the road trying to unravel these life stories, for the past 30 years, because it's just important to know as much about Frederick Douglass as Thomas Jefferson, as much about Sammy Davis Jr. as Frank Sinatra. And so the arts has meant a lot to me. So when I come into some place like this and I see these figures that have been honored, it lets me know that the literary gods have guided me in the direction of where I should be going.
Joan, your project tells stories about the divide through music and dance. Tell us about it.
Okay, the project that I founded in 2016 is called The Mourning, the Creation of Racial Categories Project. I don't know if it's a good soundbite name. I always look back and go, should I have named it something else, because people don't understand mourning. And when I bring up racial categories, it's kind of a foreign concept, but you all have the check boxes that we all check for applications. And I guess you could say that I'm obsessed with how we got those categories. And I really can't rest until the country takes that question seriously. How are the categories that we use to divide 325 million people, about 7 categories, and plus we look at the world through the lens of 7 categories, which is 7 billion people. How did those categories come to be? And I look at how they were invented, and there's rules for putting people into categories. And it feels to me, if we understand the rules that got us into categories and we don't look at them as natural divisions of humanity, that we will be better equipped to understand the barriers to equality in the United States. Each category was formed out of trauma. And to give you one example, and we look at all the categories, like all the categories have to be part of the story of race. We tend to focus on black and white, which is the fundamental division in the society, and everyone else has to find their place between the two. So the project, one of the things we do is say, okay, well, who belongs to the black category? And the rule of thumb has been any evidence of African descent qualifies one for membership in the black category. Think about what that means. That means any other ancestry discounts your identity, is not part of your identity. Your identity is first and foremost black in the United States. think about what that means. Think about the white category, which its rule of thumb has always been, when white mixes with non-white, the baby can never be white. White, the inventor of the categories, could have said, all our children born to white will be white, but white did not do that. So these two examples that I gave you, I'm hoping that you see, they feel simple in a way. They feel like, well, yeah, I do notice that the black category has all these appearances, and it's right in front of my eyes that ancestors have rejected the category. I'm using that in quotes, because it's a very complex story. But if we think about what that really means on how we form the categories, then I think we're in a better position to really understand what race is.
Will, could I interrupt real quick? This is somewhat off topic. I apologize. Thank you, Joan, for that answer. I'm really proud of the fact that a Miami Red Hawk is running the city of Cincinnati. City Manager Cheryl Long, who's in the back, is here in the building. Let's give her a round of applause, please. Cheryl was unanimously voted by Cincinnati City Council. She is only our second black woman to run the city. She manages 6,000 employees and a budget of $1.5 billion. So proud of her. But our relationship is off to a little bit of a rocky start because she convinced me to do this panel by saying that we would do it together. But somehow I'm down here and she's up there. So well done. I'm just kidding. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, you acknowledge that you have a big job here in the city of Cincinnati. How are you going to bridge some of those divides? What's at the top of the list?
This is somewhat of a cop-out, but it's all at the top of the list. Racial equity is a strategic priority of the city. And when we were designing our city government, we were setting up our council committees, we said, okay, we want one of our committees to be focused on racial equity. But where do you put that? Do you put it in housing? Yes. Do you put it in justice? Yes. Do you put it in health and human services? Yes. Because it is a comprehensive issue. The two lenses by which we look at all issues that have come across our desks in City Hall is racial equity and number two, climate. And they are so closely intertwined. But let me answer your question directly. In my view, racial equity means one word, and that is ownership. Black ownership of homes, black ownership of neighborhoods, and black ownership of businesses. We cannot ensure a truly equitable community unless we boost ownership across all of those spectrums. And we are putting our money where our mouth is. We got significant money from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan. And we're devoting a lot of those dollars, those federal dollars, to those three pillars. For the first time ever on housing, we have $57 million, the most ever in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, with a commitment of $5 million year over year. We also have put an increase of millions of dollars into our down payment assistance program to assist first-time homebuyers with putting down a down payment so they can get closer to reaching that goal of ownership. But so much of the affordable housing conversation in the city misses the fact that 60% of our community are renters. 60%. And what's making that even more difficult is because Cincinnati is so affordable on a national scale, we now have institutional investors coming into our city, buying up single-family homes, and increasing rents on the most impoverished and vulnerable communities. So the city is now using our buildings and inspections departments to crack down on those institutional landlords, hold them accountable, and try and do what we can to stem the tide of these increasing rents in our city. On black ownership, we have made a historic investment of $5 million into the African American Chamber to support what's called the Lincoln and Gilbert Fund that provides capital to new black-owned businesses and also provides capital to growing black businesses that need to scale up. So across the board, we are doing what we can to to put more money in the hands of black people, to put it very plainly. But we also have, in my original answer, I talked about we are designed this way, and that's really true. So what we're also looking at is how the city is designed, looking at our land use codes, our zoning codes. Right now, 70% of the city prohibits multifamily units. That is what's contributing to the concentrations of poverty and the segregation of the city. I'm of the opinion that if you live in our city and you work in our city, you should be able to afford to live anywhere in our city so that you can send your kids to the school of your choice. But for so many Cincinnatians, that obstacle of entry is so high because of the prohibitions on multifamily units. NIMBYism is real. This work is not going to be easy, but this is what it looks like to redesign your city in a way that is more equitable.
I hope if you have a question, in just a few minutes, we're going to have 2 mics that you can, where you can ask the panelists your questions. So think of something good and hard, and we'll keep the conversation going. Wil, you've talked at length in the past about growing up black in your community and how it shaped you and how it shaped some of the narrative in some of your books. What was it about your childhood that had a significant impact on you?
Wow, yeah, I think it was the fact that and that my grandmother, who I lived with, came from Selma, Alabama, that civil rights soaked city. And so as a little kid, I would hear her call her relatives in Selma, Alabama, and this would have been before the Selma March, and she would get off the phone, and there would be this look of terror and outright fear on her face. And she was my grandmother, and there was no one on earth who I loved more. And so she slept down the basement so that her daughter, my mother, and her 5 children, my mother was a single mother, could move upstairs. So my grandmother went down so we could move up. And hearing those stories, sometimes she would talk about them, but I would creep to her bedroom to make sure that she was okay, to ask her if she needed anything, because she feared for her nieces and nephews and cousins who were still in Selma, Alabama. And I remember being in Selma visiting relatives and walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I knew then that, that the historic figures who I went after in my work were very meaningful. And I've written about people from all walks of life and all races of life, but it's something when you're in the LA riots after Rodney King was brutalized, and I was in the LA riots, or when I was in Hurricane Katrina for 33 straight days, and you're seeing a nation, a powerful, rich nation that has left people to survive on their own, black and brown people. And it's just a fact in this country that we don't study our history deep enough. I am convinced, now maybe I'm wrong, that if those people who attacked the U.S. government I mean, they attacked. There was an insurrection in this country in 2020. I mean, attacked it. I've been a foreign correspondent. I've seen foreign governments fall, democratic governments fall. I've witnessed coups with my own eyes. And so I don't want people to be naive and think that can't happen in this country, because it almost did. And we all should shudder at that. We all should find a way, because 98% of those people who attacked, who were in the insurrection, were white. Okay, so we need to get inside of their mindset and understand how that happened. How a group of men in Michigan white men think that they can kidnap the governor of Michigan and take her out into the middle of a river and leave her. Okay, so we need to unravel this stuff. It's 2022, and W.E.B. Du Bois said that the problem of the 20th century is going to be race. Well, it's the problem of the 21st century too. It is a colossal problem in this country, and we run from it at our peril. And so I grew up around history when my parents and my grandparents and my mother lived in an integrated neighborhood. And then my mother wanted to live on her own, so she took her 5 kids and moved to a housing project that was all black. It was all black. And so as a little kid, I looked around and all of my white friends were left behind. And my mother had moved us to a segregated part of town. And so when I got there, and this is the end of it, when I got there, this amazing high school, East High School, had won 2 state championships in basketball and baseball. No other high school in the history of this country had done that. In the same year, 1968, 1969. So life goes on, I become a writer, and I keep going back to my hometown saying to myself, wow, when is a national writer going to come in here and going to do that story about East High School? Because it's an amazing story. It's Friday Night Lights times 5. It's just an amazing story. And nobody did it, and I looked in the mirror and I said, Will, it's your story. You got to do it.
Joan, what is your take on race relations now as opposed to 5 years ago? Do you think things are better now than they were then?
You know, that's such a big question, and getting the context for what context should I look at to see, should I look at Cincinnati or neighborhoods or what to talk about race relations? But I guess, the best way I can answer this is say that my project thinks that our country has not addressed the question of how we got the racial categories. I know I've said this before, and I look at little things people say, and then we make a story out of it. We might make a movie out of it, we make art, we might make dance. So I'll just give you a little example. But it seems so little, but it's so big. Take this dialogue between a mother and a daughter. The daughter appears black, the mother appears white. The daughter is 5 years old and says one day to her mother, Mom, I'm white like you, right? This is a real story. And the mother goes, well, not exactly. You're white and you're black, but you look like daddy. And so people see you as black. And she's saying this to this little child. And then we have this little movie that goes into how is it that in the United States, a parent and their child can be different races? And we go into the history of how we just accept this, like we say so naturally, oh, that mom's got a black kid, that white mom's got a black kid. That's a huge, story in the sense that now the family shares the weight of race in their relationship. So I think what our story does is really, our project does is we talk about age-old stories that we haven't resolved yet, that we haven't resolved the idea that we separated, you could tell by the definitions I gave of white and black, we separated families to make black. White did not claim its children, black claimed all the children it had, because no one else, everyone that any child black had was black, no matter who they had it with. And I think to know the diversity within black and white pushing away other groups, I think that has great relevance for understanding where we are today. And just to give one quick example, it's not really a quick example because MCRC really doesn't have quick examples. But if you take the black category and you take one of the rules that decided who was black, 1/128th in some states, that rule said if you have an ancestor 6 generations removed from you, you are black. Think about what rules like that mean, what rules like that did to black. It made black a contaminating force in society. How does society react to something that's treated as a contaminating force? They watch it, they repel from it, its safety is questioned because no one wants black to be part of itself. So the black category has never felt safe. And you could tell in the rules that made the black category that safety is one of its key issues. I hope I'm making sense here, but I think
I'm a little confused,
yes.
to be honest.
Yes.
I think, are you asking a rhetorical question? Do you have the answer to the question? My take is, if America looks at every person with color in their skin a certain way.
Say that again.
They look at us a certain way.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're black, it's always been this way, and my parents grew up in Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama. My mother's fair skin, but she was still black.
Correct, that's what, you're agreeing with everything I say, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wish that was
So
the
it's
case.
more than just those categories. I mean, you could really take it back to slavery. I mean, blacks were made to feel less than, inferior.
Yes.
And then I'm sure they came up with the boxes to check a box because they wanted to know who you were.
Yes. The rules made black what it is, the rules of classification. That's, and you could see all the ancestries that are in black that aren't acknowledged in calling black black. I think that's a big deal. That's what MCRC believes.
Well, it is a big deal because, being in this wonderful building, in this country, no matter how much you achieve, you're always going to be black. To this day, this week, I walk into stores and maybe you feel like people are looking at you in a certain way because you're black. You wonder why someone doesn't come up to you and ask you if you want to buy something. And it's like they ignore you and you wonder, okay, is it just me or is this really happening? So no matter who you are, where you come from, how much you make, you will always at least feel black.
Right. And I just want to emphasize the rules that enforce that idea of what black is. That we don't look at those rules very closely and see that we were made by them. And those rules had dramatic effects on what preoccupations a category has, like with safety. That is a rule that created a feeling of being unsafe because no one wanted black to be part of them. 1/128. So that, really, in a way, I get a little frustrated talking about race because it's not a soundbite story. And then I'm trying to make it soundbite, but it isn't. And so we do use the arts to help us tell the story. Like we have a huge family tree of 128 great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers, and one is colored a shade, and all the rest are white. And the line that follows is black because of this one ancestor up there and the way our country saw race. So that it's very complex to talk about, and then also say, what are the ramifications for us today in who we are? And that's what I'm trying to get across here.
Mayor Pureval? What is your take? What is your take? How do you respond?
What was the original question?
I know. What was the original question? I was talking about your take on race relations in this country, whether things are better now than they were 5 years ago. What do you think?
I think it is instinctual and natural and probably somewhat cathartic to throw your hands in the air and say that it's never been worse, right? And I can understand why people would think that. But I think that does do injustice to generations of people who have been struggling and progressing to make the country live up to the values that it was founded on. We certainly continue to have systemic problems. We certainly continue to face new and, in some ways, not new threats to our democracy and to race relations in this country. But I am optimistic that there are good faith people in public service and not who are fighting every day to put race front and center in the center of the frame and continue to fight for it. Now, that's the optimistic view. The somewhat realistic view is that there continues to be, by a different name, factions of our country who are increasingly violent and increasingly taking drastic measures in order to fight to keep an ethnic white majority in our country, who are threatened by the coming majority-minority demographics across the country and state by state. And that rears its ugly head through these sham fights about critical race theory. And if you think, oh, that's for some other town or some other state or some other city, it's happening in a suburb of Cincinnati, right here at our doorstep. It is a racist infection that we are still struggling with today. But despite that, I remain optimistic that we're continuing the fight.
It is sort of a muddled picture, right? Because you were elected here, right? So it is a muddled picture, and I'm sure you all remember when Barack Obama was elected, there was this relief, and people were saying, oh, we're living in a post-racial society. Remember that? I mean, it's incredible, but according to the FBI, it also created a backlash because you had white supremacist groups who reacted to that, which led to Charleston and several other domestic terrorism incidents. So it is interesting how we've made progress, but for some reason there is a segment of society that does not want to let go or move forward because they see someone else as a threat. But how do you get over that? How do you move forward? Will?
Yeah, there is a lot, how can I put this? There is a lot to feel buoyant about being black. I mean, I just want to stress that, we have heroes and heroines to shed light. James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, W.E.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, singers, Marvin Gaye, who was singing about the climate 40 years ago. Mercy, mercy me. So there are a lot of things to feel hopeful, I guess, but I'm aware of this quote. People have quoted Martin Luther King Jr. a lot today. The greatest moral leader that this country has ever had. And he said, and I've been a foreign correspondent, so this really means a lot to me. He said, if America is destroyed, it will be destroyed from within, not from without. So Martin Luther King Jr. knew that the forces of hate oozed through this country on a day-to-day basis. And I think on January 6, 2020, it was a frightening wake-up call. People are in prison today for having attacked our government. And friends of mine had called me from Italy that day, South Africa, Zambia, India, and they asked me, Will, what is happening to America? And so we have to put the question front and center. And so are things better? It's hard to say from what happened from 2016 to 2020. America elected a tyrant. American voters sent a tyrant into the White House. I'm an author. There were no readings at the White House by authors for those 4 years. From 2008 to 2016, there were dozens of poets called to the White House, dozens of singers, folk singers, jazz musicians, rap artists, all kind of singers and artists were called to the White House from 2008 to 2016. That's America, the brew of who we are. We are country music, we are soul music, we are jazz, and yet America elected 2016 to 2020 to put somebody in the White House who ignored all of that. And it was just wrong on so many levels. It was wrong, and I pray that the nation wakes up going into the midterms, because you talk about this building and civil rights. Okay, the nation has just snatched a woman's right to govern her body. We have done that in America. We have done that. And we should not have done that. You can be pro-life, pro-choice, but, that's a woman's body. And when you attack people's civil rights, and that's what has been done because certain judges have been put in high chairs, and the whole of society suffers for that. We really do. We should not be limiting people's rights. We should be expanding. If we're smarter, if we're the richest nation on earth, why have we devolved to that? position?
I think that's a very good question. And I'm not going to get into politics. But I think people have taken certain rights for granted. I think people have gotten complacent. Mm-hmm. And, I think to your point about that certain person, I as someone who works in Washington, there's just a lack of civility. And it's not only him, it's just people don't care anymore. And I think that kind of goes back to what he did say, that, political correctness, whatever. But political correctness, it's a term, but it means something. It sort of keeps people from saying stupid things to other people. And I think that's what has happened, is like people don't care about how someone else feels about something. They'll just, sound off about it. And I think there is this lack of discourse among politicians, and then that seeps out into social media. It's just, there's a lot of that. And, it's not just Republicans or far-right Republicans. It's across the spectrum. It's almost, everybody has something to say, and no one wants to put a lid on it.
Yeah, but Jeff, now it's more of them. It's more of the, it's more of the wing nuts, the far right wing people, who believe in QAnon and the conspiracy theories. Now we can be real about this, Jeff. I mean, I know you in Washington,
There are a
but
lot
we can be real
of
about
conspiracy theories out there, and that is a scary thing. That I spend a lot of time dispelling fantasy. And you're wondering, why do people believe this stuff? But they do. And it's really sad. On January 6th, and I was on the lawn with people behind me climbing the walls and just thinking to myself, I cannot believe I'm seeing this right now. Yeah. But those people believed that there was a chance that they could overturn the vote. They actually believed it. That, to me, is incredible. They actually believed that was going to happen. The fact that that many people bought into that, and now their lives are destroyed, because they thought that there was some hope.
I would love every college.
It can't just be us talking. Don't you guys have any questions?
Well, yeah, okay.
You have it. All right, somebody go to the mic. Where's the mic? Who's going to bring over the mic? Okay.
Hello. Thank you all for joining us today.
All right, what is your name?
My name is Taryn. I'm a third year studying diplomacy and sustainable development. So my question is, how do we transplant these kinds of conversations into the classroom in an invitational way?
All right, Mayor. Come on, you got to have some answers. Yeah, who is the question for? Do you
Joan,
All
you
right.
have a PhD.
All right, Joan.
Okay. This is the way we do it. We've had hundreds of conversations with people of all different racial classifications. And generally, we set it up because our stories at MCRC are based on lived experiences of race. And I think one of the reasons I'm having a difficulty with today is because our focus is so much on lived experiences. And people of different races, one racial classification will interview someone of another racial classification and learn about how they live race. And one of the things that we've learned is there's many ways people live out race. The experience is very diverse. Like if we interview 100 black appearing people or Asian appearing people, you get these remarkable stories. But what runs through these stories is each of the categories does have a trauma that comes up. Like safety always comes up. Good things come up about the Black category, but safety comes up as a primary concern. And what we learn is, and with the Native American category, and I'm using the language of our country's official name here, their preoccupation is with proving they're Native American and not disappearing. That's what their greatest work is about, and that shows up in every interview. And when you have a class that does these interviews and then brings their story in, and everyone hears that story, and then you say, can we make art out of this to talk about how people have been separated from ancestors, or they're a different race than their sibling, and what that experience is like? The whole group gets together to try to iron out that topic. And it turns out that MCRC is very valuable in the classroom because students are really curious. The young people today don't want to check the categories, especially the white category. Does not want to check white. And we also have people can check white, more than one race, and we have a lot of students that try to check more than one race, but they can't live more than one race. And so we're able to see, like, in just learning lived experiences, what race really is and the pressures to conform to ideas of race. I don't know if that makes sense or not, what I'm saying.
It does. Can I ask a follow-up question? So my thing is, sometimes I worry that when we have these conversations, we might overemphasize the traumatic experiences. So, like, where do we strike that balance so that we have a well-rounded perception of the Black experience or the Asian experience that's not so diluted with trauma?
Yeah, I think Cincinnati is an incredible example of a story of Black excellence and Black achievement. Just a handful of examples. Black Tech Week is the preeminent national conference for Black owners, Black investors, and Black tech creators. And it's not in LA or Miami or Silicon Valley, it's in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's here because we have an extraordinary wealth of talent, of Black creation, and Black support through capital. The history of Black music in Cincinnati is profound with King Records, and that is now finally being celebrated due to the leadership of Alicia Reese through the Black Walk of Fame right there on the banks at near the Bengals Stadium. And speaking of the Bengals, it's sports, but the Bengals are young and diverse. They've got that confident swagger that is reflective of our community and the city. And the Bengals, frankly, are Black-led. They're not Black-owned, which, of course, we have to work on that equity and ownership piece, but they are Black-led. And so there's example after example of Black excellence and Black achievement in Cincinnati, and it's part of my job to tell that story in a compelling and persuasive way. And I lean heavily on that aspect of Cincinnati when I'm on the national stage.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, my name's Kennedy. I'm a fourth year at Miami, double majoring in political science and philosophy. And my question has to do with, I guess, mobilization is the way that I would phrase it. Wil Haygood, as you were saying earlier, race has extended beyond the Du Bois quote of being the issue of the 20th century and now into the 21st century. And it seems now we are not fully comfortable, albeit, but more comfortable having conversations like this in these spaces. So what do you think it is about the kind of like mobilization or movements for justice that don't seem to be quite as effective as we've seen in the past? When we have things like social media that appear to connect us more, we are more willing to have conversations like this about these topics. And as you were saying earlier, there doesn't seem to be a lack of belief that we can all make a collective change. So what to the three of you do you think is missing in making like fully impactful change for justice?
I I was at the Boston Globe in 1997. Bill Clinton, he was in office in 1997, right?
Mhm.
Well, yeah. So Bill Clinton had come up with something, and he announced it at the White House. He said, America needs to talk about race. And so my newspaper chose 10 reporters and said, you all go out across America because Bill Clinton has ordered these cities to have gatherings to talk about race. And so I was on the team, and I went to Louisville. And as I'm flying into Louisville, and I'm saying to myself, you know, this is a fairly nice sized city. And I'm thinking, you know, so it's probably going to be, I don't know, 800, 900, 1,000 people at this black church. And when we talk about race, make no mistake about it, laws were implemented in this country against blacks. Segregation, the laws of segregation. Black soldiers in World War I were not wanted by the American military, so they went to France and fought and won medals to defend this country. But they had to go overseas and do it. That's how much they loved America. James Baldwin said famously, I love America so much, that's why I give myself the right to criticize her. That's what James Baldwin said. That's my man. But anyway, I walked into this church in Louisville, and there were 40 people. You know, because they were just afraid to talk about race. You know, it was a mix, black and white, mostly. But I think that even where we're at now, it's very difficult to talk about race. I mean, you have people trying to ban books by authors who are gay or black or brown. I mean, so there's a movement out there, and I think that the other side of the movement, you know, people like you and others are just going to have to stand taller, because we do need to talk about that. Mayor, I know he'll have something to say about this.
Thank you. Well, I don't think you're giving these movements enough credit, right? A vast majority of Americans believe in sensible gun reform. Majority of Americans believe in abortion rights. A majority of Americans believe and expect action on climate change. The movements that we've seen in our country have done an incredible job of mobilizing and inspiring and shifting public opinion in a really drastic and profound way. What they are running up against is, quite frankly, a rigged system. Our democracy in so many ways has been polluted by and really undermined by two insidious forces. The first is unchecked amounts of dark money that gets poured into races that often have nothing to do with the district that they're in and are outside of the boundaries. And the second is gerrymandering. It's gerrymandering. Yes, Democrats and Republicans do it, but profoundly Republicans have been doing it in a surgical way, specifically to disenfranchise poor and specifically black voters. And so when you have a gerrymandered system of government that appeals to the fringes, you get inaction at the national level, and what's worse, at the state level, you get action that is hurting people, that is pouring more guns onto our streets, that are arming teachers, that are trying to erase gay people from the country. And so it's not an issue of the mobilization efforts, it is an issue, in my view, of these two, right now, tenets of our system of democracy.
Joan?
Okay. You know what? I have the lens of the categories and how they were broken apart. And I do feel one big movement in terms of race and breaking down the categories is the young people who are identifying as two or more races. We have always had two or more races. We just never had the option to check them. So it appeared that everybody was a clear-cut racial category. And in some schools, 17% of the student body checks two or more races. This group is trying to figure out how to blend, to recognize white and black in them, or Asian and black in them, and it's a very difficult task because we're so categorical in our lens. And I do find this group interesting because will they succeed? They get so much pressure to say, well, you know, you look black, so just live black. Or, oh, you look Asian, why are you trying to be white? Or white, you look white, so why are you claiming you're Hispanic? They're fighting against that, which is what we've never done before 2000 when you could be two or more races. It might be one way to bring racial categories together. So I'm fascinated by how this group handles trying to identify with more than one race in a categorical society.
Okay, last question.
Thank you. So this was hit on a little bit earlier by Mr. Haygood, and is it Dr. Ferrante?
Joan's fine.
Okay. But race in classrooms has been a constant discussion right now, and currently College Board is test running in 60 schools AP African American Studies, which has received mixed reception right now. There are some folks who are very excited about it because it represents the integration of underrepresented history in classrooms. And there are other folks who have essentially said this is segregating African American history from existing history courses like AP US History. So from that perspective, what do you think the progression of courses like AP African American Studies means for the discussion of race in classrooms?
Say the last part of that again. Louder.
What do you think that the integration of classes like AP African American Studies means for discussion of race in classrooms?
Yeah, you know, there was a New York Times Sunday Magazine article about 3 months ago, and it said that the entire publishing industry has been geared toward white readers, and that now the entire publishing industry is trying to become more woke. And so we need diverse voices on the college campuses. I think it is of paramount importance. You're talking about an article that was just in the Times just like 3 months ago. And it went right to the publishing industry. You know, and so that's critical that we expand what we're teaching in the classroom. I think is extraordinarily critical.
All right, I said that was the last question, but one more question.
Mayor Pureval, first off, congratulations on your election. Being the first to do anything is a commendable feat, so I congratulate you on that.
How often do you clap for a Buckeye and a Bearcat? That was very touching. Thank you. I've circled Miami in my education pedigree, so hopefully one day I'll get there.
You mentioned earlier your plans to put money into the hands of black families, and you mentioned you wanted black people who work for this city to be able to live anywhere in this city and to be able to send their children to the schools of their choice. Realistically, every neighborhood can only hold so many people, and every school can only educate so many students. What is your plan to enhance the quality of those other schools that so many students will inevitably end up at?
Yeah, it's a great question. The educational inequities in our nation, but particularly our city, are extraordinarily profound. And the way that we fund schools in the state, despite it being held unconstitutional over and over again in the Supreme Court, continues to persist and continues to be a source of so many of the inequities. When you're mayor, nothing is not your responsibility, right? So I'm not saying that, but I am saying that the direct impact I can have on the schools is somewhat limited because they are governed by a school board that's independently elected and a superintendent. What I can do to make sure that all of our Cincinnati public schools are excelling is, number one, continuing to attract more and more talent, more and more employees and employers into the city to generate more revenue, more taxes that can go to funding desperate public schools who need that funding, to create an economy where no matter what you look like, you have the same opportunity of success, to dismantle some of those barriers that I was talking about earlier. And then, of course, safety. Not just gun violence safety, but also pedestrian safety. What's becoming more and more of a problem in Cincinnati are folks who are either walking to school or just walking in their neighborhood, being struck by cars that are blowing red lights, or being struck by cars that are exceeding the speed limit. So education is, certainly a critical pillar in order to drive more equity into our community. And the way that I can support that is by creating dense, diverse neighborhoods that have good public transportation, that lean into the arts, and are places where people want to live and stay. I've talked to Ironetta Wright, the new superintendent, about our partnership, and we're already working together on a number of programs. I'll just talk about one of those. Right now, it's very difficult to convince folks to join public safety professions, police, fire, EMS, for a whole host of reasons that are relevant to race, frankly. But it's in our best interest as a city to create opportunities for CPS graduates to join the city employment department, specifically in police and fire. They're good jobs with good benefits, and it's very important, particularly within police, for our police officers to reflect the diversity of the community that they're serving. And there's no better way to do that than homegrown talent. We're working on creating a public safety academy within CPS schools where kids who go through that program and graduate get extra credit points on the civil service exam that they're expected to take after they graduate to get into police and fire. So we're thinking about different ways of not just creating summer youth jobs, for example. Of course, lifeguards are incredibly important, as we learned this summer, but creating career opportunities for our CPS graduates after high school.
All right, that will be the final word that concludes our panel discussion. A round of applause for our panelists. And just a reminder, Wil has more books up there, so if you want a personalized copy, they're right outside that door up those stairs. On behalf of Miami University, I want to thank the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center for being such a gracious host. And of course, thank you to everyone who helped put this event together. A round of applause for them. Thanks for coming, and have a safe trip home.